quote, by simultaneously expanding white men's right to kill and constricting women's right not to die, this Supreme Court, referring to the current United States Supreme Court, has turned the Constitution into a homicide pact as well, close quote. Did you write that?
The Supreme Court is a death panel. Is that your opinion?
In the context of this hearing, I think it is important to emphasize why I am here, which is to talk about my views on the First Amendment.
No. That's not what I asked you. Do you think the Supreme Court is a death panel?
Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from. Wasn't a courtroom drama or some staged TV performance. That was your United States Senate in action. Senator Marsha Blackburn threw out what should have been the easiest question of the day. If you're calling the Supreme Court a death panel, do you actually mean it? Seems simple, right? But instead of answering, Professor Mary Ann Franks danced around it like she was trying out for a Broadway show. Evasion, deflection, anything but clarity. Senator John Kennedy jumps in, not empty-handed, but with a literal stack of receipts, law review articles, old tweets, direct quotes, everything he needed to show this professor's real record. The polished mask of academic respectability slipped, and underneath was raw, unfiltered ideology dressed up as scholarship. This is why hearings like this matter. Because when people in positions of influence toss out inflammatory rhetoric like homicide pact and death panel to describe our highest court, they're not just making headlines, they're shaping how young lawyers, judges, and the public at large view the Constitution itself. And folks, if we let that kind of unchecked spin take root, it erodes trust in the very foundation that protects our freedoms. So buckle up, because we're going to break this down moment by moment and show you exactly how Senators Blackburn and Kennedy exposed the dangerous doublespeak playing out in plain sight.
Professor Franks, let me ask you, I listened to your and Ms. Hemingway's testimony and Professor Turley's, so I got part of it. As I understand it, your position, Professor Franks, is that, I think you used the word myth. It is a myth that the Biden administration used government to compel speech, private speech, but that the Trump administration is doing that. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Do you think perhaps you're allowing your personal political beliefs to affect your objectivity here?
No, I do not. What is guiding my answers here is that I'm looking to see what the Supreme Court has said. You notice that in the testimony about the censorship industrial complex.
I got that part.
No, I just
want to
clarify.
No, but I've only got 5 minutes. Your answer is no, as I appreciate it. Let me ask you a couple questions. You wrote a law review article in December of 2023 for the New York University Law Review, and it was about the two cases, Bruin, Supreme Court case, and Dobbs. Remember that article?
Yes, I do.
Okay. In this article, you said, I'm going to quote your words, taken together, these two cases demonstrate that the Supreme Court has embraced the use of the Constitution as a tool of racial patriarchy, end quote. Did you say that?
Yes.
Okay. And then you went on to say, quote, when the Supreme Court declares that there is a constitutional right to armed self-defense in public, it openly embraces and promotes a culture that privileges white men's ability to terrorize and kill those that they perceive as threats, close quote. Did I read that correctly?
I believe so. Thank you for reading.
Okay. And did you also say in that article, I'm going to quote again, quote, by simultaneously expanding white men's right to kill and constricting women's right not to die, this Supreme Court, referring to the current United States Supreme Court, has turned the Constitution into a homicide pact as well, close quote. Did you write that?
That sounds like me.
Okay. In November of 2024, you tweet, don't you?
I'm not sure what the current terminology is for it, but yes, I am sometimes on the social platform that was formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, you're on a lot, aren't you?
I'm not sure what the relevance of that is.
You're trying to be provocative on there, don't you?
Again, I'm not sure what the
Well,
relevance
let
of
me
this
let me
question
let me
is.
show you the relevance. On November 7th, 2024, from your tweet, here's one of your tweets at 2:41 p.m. Quote: "The majority of Americans hate women. The majority of Americans hate women more than they love anything, including democracy." Close quote. Did I read that correctly?
I am not sure what this has to do with the subject matter of this
Did you
hearing.
say it?
I do not have those words in front of me. I probably said something along those lines, but
Yeah,
what is
you
the
said it.
relevance
Here
of that
it
to
is,
this
big as
hearing?
Dallas, right there.
Yes.
But your political beliefs don't impact your feelings about President Biden or President Trump.
I don't have feelings about either of them. What I have
Sounds
is
to me
doctrine.
like your favorite feeling is anger. Let me ask you this. You issued another tweet. This was in May of 2022. You've just been tweeting up a storm. You said, quote, "There's a reason why the conservative-dominated Supreme Court thinks the Constitution does not contain a right to an abortion, but is convinced that it contains an individual right to possess firearms. And that reason is white male supremacy," close quote. Did I read that correctly?
Is there a question in this?
Did I read that correctly? That's
Is there
my
a question that is relevant to this hearing?
Did I
And
read
more
that
relevant-
correctly? Do you really think that the United States Supreme Court, you're an officer of the court, is guided by white male supremacy?
I believe that the First Amendment prohibits the president
Did you
and other
say
state
that?
officials for punishing people for
Did
their
you honestly say that, Professor?
I
And you
believe
expect us,
that the First
as a
Amendment,
Democratic witness, to take you seriously? Are you kidding me?
I believe that you should take
You
the First
heard of
Amendment
curb your
seriously, sir.
enthusiasm? Here's my saying, curb my nausea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for taking your time to be here today. Dr. Franks, we're here to talk about free speech, correct?
Yes.
And we're here to talk about that being a fundamental right guaranteed by the Constitution, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the Supreme Court plays an essential role in guaranteeing those constitutional rights, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about a tweet that you had in January 2024. The Supreme Court is a death panel. Is that your opinion?
In the context of this hearing, I think it is important to emphasize why I am here, which is to talk about my views on the First Amendment and my understanding of the
That's not
doctrine.
what I ask you. Do you think the Supreme Court is a death panel?
In the
for
context of
free
the cases
speech?
that, not for free speech, no, that was not the context of that particular
Oh, my goodness,
communication.
okay. Well, it appears that you see the Supreme Court as a death panel, and that is some of the same rhetoric that unfortunately we continue to hear from some on the left who are trying to villainize justices who are doing their job. And I would like to just ask you, knowing that you have put this out, that the Supreme Court is a death panel, then let me ask you this. Do you look at Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson as members of the death panel, or is this just the justices that you disagree with?
I do not believe that the comments that you are referring to have relevance for this particular hearing, but here's what I will say. This is an administration that is threatening judges in addition to other people that he disagrees with. So yes,
Okay,
if your question is, do I defend judges?
ready to
Am
move
I
on.
worried
Thank
about
you.
judges'
Ms.
security?
Hemingway,
I am.
I'd like to
I am
come-
worried.
When a law professor, someone trusted with shaping the next generation of attorneys and judges, writes that the Constitution is a homicide pact and that Supreme Court rulings are nothing more than tools of racial patriarchy, that is not legal scholarship. That is political warfare dressed up in academic robes. And it matters more than people realize. Because once you convince enough people that the Constitution itself is poisoned, then every ruling you don't like suddenly becomes illegitimate by default. Confidence in the system begins to erode. And it happens quietly, without anyone ever firing a single shot. That is why Senator Kennedy pressed so hard during this hearing. He wasn't playing a cheap game of gotcha. He was testing whether the principles we claim to defend are actually being upheld. And every time he read her own words back to her, instead of owning them and saying, yes, I said it, and here's why, she tried to sidestep. She insisted her own words weren't relevant. Think about that. Imagine testifying in front of the Senate about free speech and then claiming that your own speech is off limits. That's not only ironic, it destroys credibility. Now, zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. Free speech is not safe when the very people who claim to defend it only do so selectively. If you cheer when one side gets silenced, but then cry foul when your own side is criticized, that is not principle. That is privilege. And labeling the highest court in the land a death panel just because you dislike a decision, that's not debate. That is delegitimization. And here's the real danger. Once the public believes the Supreme Court itself is corrupt, the groundwork is laid for chaos. If every law, every ruling, every decision can be dismissed as supremacist or patriarchal anytime it cuts against a favored narrative, then the Constitution becomes nothing more than a partisan football. And when that happens, liberty doesn't explode overnight. It just quietly fades into the background. Senators Blackburn and Kennedy showed exactly what happens when ideology tries to trample that truth. And if you felt uneasy watching Professor Franks dodge those questions, it's because deep down, we all know the stakes are far higher than just one hearing. The Constitution isn't a myth. It isn't a homicide pact. And it's certainly not a death panel. It is the foundation that guarantees your freedom, your right to speak, to worship, to defend yourself. And yes, even to criticize the court itself if you want to. The irony here is impossible to ignore. The very same freedom that lets Professor Franks attack the court is the freedom she seems willing to undermine. And if that isn't worth defending, I don't know what is. If you're still here with us, comment where you're watching from. Hit that like button.